What kind of a person would you be if you shut yourself away from the world? Whether it's out of anger, a lack of motivation, a sense of overwhelming hopelessness or despair, depression or mental health issues, failed dreams, or just the fear of failure? If you separated yourself from the world and nobody would know if you went missing, who are you? The hikikomori is a term frequently used in Japan to classify a group of people who intentionally socially withdraw, living off previous month's wages or living in their parents' homes, only leaving their houses when they run out of food or necessities, and is a serious societal problem that is a direct product of the internet age. This kind of lifestyle started in Japan in the mid-90s, and there's no question as to why it started there. The Japanese Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, or the MIAC, found that about 20% of all young people in Japan are addicted to the internet, and that statistic is sure to only increase. 1,115,000 people in Japan are chronic hikikomori. That's just Japan. More than 1 million people there live the same day, every day, over and over again, the only difference being the show or anime they watch, or the video game they spend all day playing. And I'm sure all of this is sounding very familiar. Since the beginning of the pandemic, early 2020, young people all over the world have been pushed to live a sedentary indoor lifestyle due to lockdowns and global travel restrictions. Teens and young adults all over the world live lifestyles similar to that of the classic hikikomori, and for some there's no going back now. The social issue is that the prevalence of this shut-in lifestyle is spreading at an alarming rate, and Generation Z is in danger of being lost to a void of which there's no exit. Excessive internet usage and the non-stop information input that Generation Z experiences for 12 hours a day is creating a generation of narcissists with no aspirations and overpowering nihilism. The millennial generation was the first generation to grow up with an early version of the internet and had an easy access to infinite information. But Generation Z was the first generation that grew up being told that the world was coming to an end, that the planet was dying, that living your dreams was impossible because there's always going to be someone better than you, that talent and creativity was pointless because technology has begun to exceed humanity's abilities, and that the only way to be happy is to slave away at a meaningless job and make your way to the top of the garbage pile, because that's what success is now, right? The list goes on. It's predicted that over 50% of Generation Z won't be married before the age of 40, and the toxic environments created by dating apps and social media aren't helping people feel any less alone either. The suicide rate in the US has increased by 30% in the last 2 years. We can hope all we want, but I believe that Generation Z will be known as the second lost generation. Welcome to the NHK is an anime exactly about this. It came out in 2002, made over 20 years ago, and I don't think there's a single piece of modern media today that accurately represents the mental anguish and total utter despair of the generation of nihilists. It's a masterpiece, a magnificently depressing masterpiece, decades ahead of its time, and couldn't be more relevant. Tatsuhiro Sato, a 22-year-old college dropout with no job, barely surviving off of what little he has left in his bank account, and whatever checks he gets in the mail from his parents who take far too much pity on what they could only see as a disappointment. Many shows have tried to convey to the general public the life of a hikikomori, but they often miss the whole point. Most of the time they're romanticized, unrealistic, and portray versions of reality far too cheery compared to that of one who truly lives a meaningless life. Sato awakes from his dream, sits up, lights a cigarette, and remarks about how he's been feeling off lately, and his focus shifts to the music coming from his neighbor's apartment. He decides he's finally had enough of the torturous magical girl theme and storms toward the door of his apartment to go chew out his neighbor, and just before he can grab the door handle, he freezes, and we get a peek into the crippling social anxiety that Sato endures every time he goes out into the world. He decides that the stress of leaving the only place he's known for the last 3 years is too much to bear, and returns to his futon, defeated. He begins to hallucinate the lyrics of the song and begins talking to himself, mentally trapping himself into another one of his own delusions. He decides to take his future into his own hands and remembers hearing about a monk who secluded himself from society in the mountains of Japan to learn how to crush a boulder with his own hands. Totally lost in his delusion, Sato smashes a beer bottle on his table and experiences but a moment of pride and excitement before the pain sets in and blood drips down his arm. And then the doorbell rings. He bounces around his room, attempting to bandage his hand, repeatedly assuring the visitor that he is on his way to the door, while he panics about who could possibly be on the other side. As he tightens the bandage around his arm, he glances through the spy hole and sees a girl in a sundress, holding an umbrella. Hesitantly, he opens the door, and immediately locks eyes with Misaki Nakahara, the girl who will try to rescue him from his own self-destruction. Out from behind the door jumps Misaki's aunt, who cheerfully tells Sato about how they're running a program helping hikikomori reintegrate back into society, which Sato predictably shuts down, arguing that he's not a hikikomori and wants to be left alone. He shuts the door and his mind fills with wonder and questions surrounding the innocent girl with the umbrella. He cracks the door to peer outside, expecting the two to have left, and finds her further down the walkway, staring at him, as if she knew he would open the door. She gives him a warm smile and walks off to join her aunt. You may think that only idiots could have the audacity to waste their lives away, waiting for nothing, but I think it's the opposite. Sato does stupid things, but he is smart. He lies to himself and digs himself deep into delusions and does whatever he can to escape reality. But there are moments when he is totally, completely self-aware and sees the world, his life, for what it really is. He invents these crazy conspiracies and stories to prove to himself and to the world how he's the victim, that his failures and lack of trying is anyone's fault but his own. But when it comes down to it, when reality gives him a slap across the face, just for a minute or two, he's enlightened. He sees what is, what was, what needs to be, and he sees it clearly. He's honest with the universe and himself. And then he goes back to lying, to living a lie. After he goes back inside, he sits down and has a moment of clarity. He realizes that he needs to get a job and he needs to start living. He gathers his resume and everything he needs for a trek around town and goes job hunting. Sato goes from shop to shop applying for jobs until he walks into a cafe. Coincidentally, the same cafe where the girl with the umbrella works part-time. He nervously tries to strike up a conversation with her, making up stuff about motorcycles, all the while completely forgetting to ask about the job. After a very awkward attempt at human conversation, Sato shuffles out of the store, not realizing he had dropped his resume, and walks home. Later that night, Sato gets another ring at his door and goes to check, finding his resume returned to him with a personal invitation to be a part of a hikikomori rehabilitation project. The invitation is to the local park that he frequents to clear his mind from time to time, and it's from Misaki. He battles with himself, trying to convince himself that he doesn't need to be fixed, that he's fine, that he's not a hikikomori, and subsequently doesn't need to meet with her. Again, he battles with himself, deciding that he was planning on going to the park anyway, that it doesn't matter whether he goes to see her or not because he doesn't care. So he decides to go. This scene really punches me in the gut, because I do this. I end up in situations where I'm offered an opportunity to do something that takes a lot of mental effort, or I know will make me anxious, and I fight with myself. I pretend that I don't want to do it. I pretend that I don't need to leave my shell. I fight with myself, and I try to convince myself that I don't need to be a part of the rest of the world. But my subconscious fights back. The human desire to connect and form human relationships fights with my irrational desire to lock myself away. and I always end up finding an excuse to do the things I know deep in my heart that I need to do, but don't have the courage to openly admit that I need. I pretend it's because I don't care, but in reality, I care so much I argue with myself about it. Having watched this show, seeing Sato's life both through his eyes and from the eyes of the viewer, it gives me a weird, surreal sense of deep anxiety that I could possibly relate to this total failure of a human. I see myself in someone who is portrayed as a complete disaster, because he is. That scares me, because just like you, I don't want to be like him. In the second episode, Misaki gives Sato a contract that states that if he signs, she'll help him learn how to reintegrate in society, and that he is committing to social training and must meet her once a week at the park. He reluctantly takes the contract with him, but refuses to sign it, stating that he doesn't need help, that he's not a hikikomori. As he storms off, she tells him that she'll wait for him at the park, same time next week. The whole week he toils, debating whether or not he should see her, because he knows he needs help. He's just too scared to admit it. He watches his clock at home, same time, a week later, and waits, fighting with his subconscious, unable to make the decision to leave or stay, but finally being so overwhelmed with worry and guilt, he ran the whole way there. When he arrived, he saw that she had waited for him, and almost as if he couldn't believe she purely wanted to help him out of the goodness of her heart, he argued with her again, saying that he wasn't a hikikomori, that he was fine, that he didn't need help. She calls him out, saying that it was obvious from the moment they met that he was a shut-in, and if he wasn't, he wouldn't have ran all the way to the park at the dead of night just to argue with her. And she was completely right. In a way, we are all a little like Sato. We all convince ourselves that we do things for the right reasons. We always find a way to justify our actions, even our lies. And we do a lot of things that don't make sense. We go out of our way in the most extreme of fashions to prove that we don't need help. We make big life decisions without thinking and act out and feel the need to scream from the rooftops that we feel okay when we are at our lowest. We lie to ourselves. We tell ourselves that we don't need anyone. Maybe it helps us sleep better at night, but even I know that's not true. We do it out of fear. We're scared that nobody cares. We're scared that nobody can help. We all refuse to ask for help because we fear rejection, and sometimes that rejection can be even more painful than what we needed help with in the first place. We're all waiting for someone to come save us. A girl in a sundress holding an umbrella to show up at our door, begging us to let them help, even though we'd probably reject it anyway, believing that it was a lie, that it was impossible for someone to care about you. We're all guilty of this, because we're human.
I know it's real.
It's easy to believe that if you asked for help, you'd be ignored, but it's really hard to actually ask. Although true happiness must come from within, I'd be lying if I said you could do it all on your own. Humans are social creatures. Our brains are designed to justify our own existences through the legitimacy of our personal relationships. That's why so many people are addicted to social media. We feel that we're being validated. Our existences are being justified through every like and follow. Social media is designed to fill a hole that never needed to be filled in the first place. It was built to give you a false sense of legitimacy, and now the youth of the world don't believe that their lives hold meaning unless they have a follower count that's high enough. The sad part is, it's still false. They're still alone. Sometimes, no matter how scary or hard it may seem, you have to reach out. Whether you're reconnecting with a long-lost friend, or asking for help in a time of mental distress, or you just want to talk to the girl or guy that makes you feel weird, you should take the leap of faith. Don't be afraid of rejection or failure, and spend your whole life wondering what if, while your soul fades to gray under the shower of blue light coming from a computer monitor. Just believe that there's still a little love left in this world and you're going to turn out all right. And if you ever feel alone, know that there are millions of people like us. So don't be afraid to say hello. Chances are we're waiting for someone just like you to save us from our loneliness, too. Maybe the world is coming to an end, and maybe it's too late to fix it. That doesn't make it okay to give up now. The time we have, today, tomorrow, next week, the memories we've made here on our little blue dot, and the memories we can make, are priceless. We might be the last of our kind. We might be the ones who see the end of the world. That doesn't make it okay to throw away the most precious resource we have. Time. Maybe you don't have to be scared of the world, as scary as it is. You can't afford to be afraid of the world anymore. Take the leap of faith. Reach out. Say hello. Love unconditionally. Even though we're all running out of time, we will never run out of love. And somewhere out there, there's someone who loves you. And if you haven't found him yet, don't give up until you do. Remember to drink some water, and thanks for listening. See you next time.